Welcome back to the Strength and Speed Podcast. I'm your host, Conquer the Gauntlet Pro and Strength and Speed owner, Evan Preparis. I've got a guest with me on the line. He's a fellow Hammer Nutrition sponsored athlete. So I'm going to introduce him, and then I'm going to try to remember to give a shout out to our sponsors, because every time I do it this way, I always forget to actually shout out the sponsor until the end of the episode. All right, so joining me, I have Mark Gaudet from Vermont. I'll tell you a little bit more about his background. Played 5 sports in high school, earning all conference honors in all sports and all state honors in basketball, cross country, and soccer. So very broad multi-sport background. Athlete of the year from his high school in 2004. Colby College, Waterville, Maine is where he went to school, and had a degree in history and computer science, and played guard for the Mules basketball team. Afterwards, he went into the Army. So went to Ranger School, graduated Ranger School, and then got interested in endurance sports. You know, he's been in the 101st Airborne Division, 75th Ranger Regiment, 1st ID, or 1st Infantry Division, deployed 4 times to Afghanistan and once to Republic of Korea. Has a master's in policy management from Georgetown University, and has plans to return to Ranger Regiment. So obviously we'll be talking about a lot of military stuff, because I have a lot of crossover points with you there. Now, some past endurance accomplishments. Besides, this is his first year on the Spartan Pro Team. He's also being sponsored by Hammer Nutrition. And so far in 2020, it's been kind of a light year, but won the Running Public Burpee 10K. Finished second place at the Ultravirus virtual 12-hour race with 85 miles at a 7:12 pace, which was very impressive. And what we care most about here is currently in 7th place at the 2020 Spartan US National Series, which I believe only has had 1 race. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, Jacksonville in February.
Yeah. Now we'll be talking about that a little bit more. And then, history of obviously top-level performances here. 8th place, 2019 JFK 50-miler, 15th place, Spartan World Championships, 2019. 11th place, 2019 Spartan North American Championships. 4th place, 2018 World's Toughest Mudder with 85 miles. Been the best Ranger competitor 4 times in the past. So some of you may know that competition, because Robert Killian, Spartan World Champion 2 times, has won it. And other than that, finished 1st place at 2013 Baton Death March and some other good stuff. Also a certified whitewater rafting guide. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate you having me on today. I've been listening for a while now, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, cool. That's always nice. I never expect my own guests, to actually have listened to the show in the past, but it's always a nice surprise. And before we forget, let's plug Hammer Nutrition. So obviously I'm a huge fan of their products. I've been using them for years. Started using them in 2014. And then I started as an athlete with them in 2015. They've been great. My favorite product is Perpetuum Carb Fat Protein Blend. It's all liquid. That's what I use for all my endurance racing. And I'd say one of my other products that people don't talk about a lot is REMCap. So it's a sleep aid, lets you sleep deeply at night, which I use a ton of for, Toughest Mudder and World's Toughest Mudder, especially those like pre-race where you get those like jitters and you're having trouble sleeping. You pump one of those pills and you just I go out. So what do you like about them, Mark?
Yeah, so as we'll get into, I'm fairly new to the OCR ultra scene, I guess, at least in a professional capacity. So I've experienced over the last few years with a bunch of different products, and once I found Hammer, I really haven't gone back to anything else. It's just a really clean product, and especially for these long ultra endurance races, I lean heavily on some of the products you mentioned, but then also the gels, the heat, and then I'm really big into the recovery products. So the Recovery Right and the Tissue Rejuvenator are 2 of my favorites. Yeah,
absolutely. I use a ton of that for both OCR Americas. I use it year round too, but I'm not as, let's say, religious about it. So sometimes I forget to take it, or, I'm busy. But yeah, if anyone wants to order some Hammer Nutrition stuff, you can use referral number 240887 and get 15% off your first order. And I don't think we're allowed to say the flavors yet, but they have a new flavor of heat coming out, and they have a new flavor of Recover Right coming out, which I know you're tracking from the Hammer Nutrition group. So just be on the lookout.
Really looking forward to it.
I'm really excited about the heat one. It looks really good. So, all right, let's kind of get into it. So we're both military guys, so that's going to come up in topic a lot during this. But let's first start off with, how did you find OCR, right? Because looking through your resume, and I deleted a ton of stuff off of it and kind of shortened it, but you've had success for a long time in a variety of sports. And how did you end up in OCR, and like why pursue it versus following one of those other sports?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. Is my dad actually got into OCR, I'd say in his 50s, I'd say 2012. He was really pushing me. He's like, hey, I think this is really like cut out for you because you're a strong runner, but you got a little bit more meat on you. So I'm about 6 feet tall. At the time, probably weighed like 165, 170, and I was a pretty decent runner. But I'm not really at that elite level of road running per se. So my dad's like, I think this is like perfect for you. You're not big enough for like the CrossFit type competitions, but you can't move with the guys on the road. But I think you might be able to take all of them when it comes to OCR. So he was pushing it at me for a long time, and I never really decided to give it a try. So I stuck with the road running, stuck with the lifting, and then as I got more into like the functional fitness at the Ranger Regiment as a lieutenant and a young captain, and then further down the road, get into the best Ranger competition. A lot of that training involved like obstacles and getting through the Darby Queen at the best Ranger competition in a fast manner. And I was finding them, hey, I am pretty good at this stuff. And then in 2016, the best Ranger competition brought Spartan race into the event. So they made it a day 2 event. So we'd covered about 40 miles in day 1, and we had just finished, I think, an 18-mile ruck that year. You go into night stakes, so a bunch of technical events all through the night. And then right as the sun is coming up, we were the very first wave of the Spartan race at Fort Benning. We're going through it, and about halfway into the race, I remember there being an Atlas stone carry, and Robert Killian, who had won the World Championship the year before in 2015, is right next to me carrying the Atlas stone. And about halfway through, you had to like dip under a wire a few feet off the ground. And I remember picking up the stone and running by Robert Killian, and like right then it like snapped in my head, like, hey, I might be pretty decent at this stuff. Of course, we get to the end. My partner and I like both missed the spear, being our first Spartan race, and Rob and his partner come up. They both drill the spear and take the event. But that was like my first, I guess, aha moment of, I think I could be pretty good at this stuff. So that was 2016. As you know, the Army keeps us pretty busy. So I didn't really do another event until 2017, also in the best Ranger competition. And then again in 2018 in the best Ranger competition, all Spartan races. I just never really had the time. And then I ended up getting picked up for a fellowship here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we moved out here, and I fell into a reliable schedule that allowed me to train to compete at the highest level. And I just decided, like, I've got a 3-year window here, and I'm going to go for it. So that's what I've been doing. So really, my OCR career really kicks off in 2018.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't start getting involved into OCR really until I went to the Command and General Staff College. So it's like it's a year where you're in the States and you're just taking college classes, but like military type college classes. And so I know what you mean with that schedule. You disappear for 6 months or a year or 4 months, and you got pre-mission training that you got to go to. So it's very disruptive. So I think some people see, especially guys like Killian or you or me that are still active duty and are still actually competing in events, and think that's fairly normal, when I'd say normal is you not being around the United States and the Army's messing with your schedule at all times. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and Rob has a little bit of a benefit being in the National Guard, but I think
Sure.
You'll see with us, we have like these windows where we can, we got to make the most of them. And I think I'm kind of into my last year of this window. So I've always kept myself in good shape, but as you know, like there's that, to be at that next level, you can't just be doing PT in the morning from 6:30 to 8 and expect to contend with the top athletes in the sport.
No, not even close. If you enter the Army in good shape, chances are it's going to pull you down to an average, right? Like it likes to, it tries to pull the weak people up, but unless you're working out on your own a significant amount, it pulls the top people down also. So you got to fight against that and train on your own. Absolutely. Now we mentioned Best Ranger, and if people aren't tracking what it is, it's such a weekend long competition. So how many hours is it about?
It's about 62 hours straight.
Yeah. So you have to do all these military tasks. And one of them you mentioned is called the Darby Queen. It's famous obstacle course. That's part of Ranger School. So for those that have never done the Darby Queen, can you compare it or describe it for them? Because I'm sure as an OCR athlete, people would be interested in what the quote unquote Army's obstacle course is like.
So I'd say it's about 1.5 miles. I'd say, yeah, about 1.5 miles in length. And you're probably talking 25 obstacles. That's just a best guess there. But some of the familiar obstacles, I think, are the dirty name. I think some of the events call it like the belly buster. Basically, where you jump to one log, you have to balance on the one log and then jump to another one, which is usually about maybe 4 feet, and then about 3 or 4 feet out in front of you, which you nail your midsection on. You've got to get over, which is pretty difficult when you're pretty beat down after a couple of days. There's the Tarzan, which is...
I'm going to jump in for a second. Yeah. I've never had a problem at any OCR doing that obstacle, the one you just described. But when I went to Ranger School a long time ago, I failed that both times I tried.
Yeah, and
like not even close. I was like, this is preposterously high, and my 5'6" frame is not making it. So
I can definitely see it, and I would say that there's 2 of them that stand next to each other, and they're not standard heights. Like one of them is significantly harder than the other one.
Oh, really?
So every year you'll see the teams who know what they're doing, they put their stronger guy on that obstacle to the right, which is a little bit harder. But yeah, this one is so high that they actually have a rope that you have to come down from to give people an idea of how different it is. It's not one where you just like flip over and then like hop down. There's one that you actually grab a rope and like slide down. So maybe, what would you say, maybe 10 feet?
Oh, I can't remember. I just remember it being really tall, and essentially it's a double one because you like stand on a low one, right? And then you jump up, and then I think you do it again.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So it's like a double. It's like a double versus what most people would know in OCR.
Right. Yep. So that's one of the events that people are familiar with. And then there's the Tarzan, or it's monkey bars, but they're wooden handles and they're extremely thick.
They're so fat. And they're like smooth from thousands of Ranger schools rubbing their grubby hands all over it.
Exactly. And it's a really long event, and the graders are very tough on that one. Like there's beams that hold them up, and if your pants brush the beams, like you're out. And it's only a couple feet wide, so you really have to maintain your lower body when you're pushing through that. And to get up onto the bar on that one, there's 3 balance beams of different heights that get you up to the monkey bars.
Oh yeah.
Which can be like, it's a little like disorienting when you get up to that high one. You're only like 10 feet off the ground, but it still feels like you're 30 feet off the ground, balancing on a pretty narrow beam. So that's one event. There's a barbed wire crawl. There's some water, like low crawling, and you have to go on your back through some water. There's a team buddy event, like a tower, where you've got to help each other up to 3 different levels and then come down.
Yeah, that one's visually that one's really cool.
Yep. Yeah, and then there's a series of obstacles that will test your fear of heights. So just extremely tall, basically ladders that are made out of telephone poles that pretty spread apart, where someone of your height might really struggle with it, but you basically have to stand and jump to the next one, pull yourself up, get your balance on one, and then continue on. And there's some cargo nets and some ropes. And are there any other ones that are popping out at you?
No, I mean, it's been a long time since I've done that one, and I start getting it confused with the one at Camp McCall, the Nasty Nick. So my
Right.
memory starts overlapping. All I remember is, so the Special Forces has a famous obstacle course race, or it's not a race, event or course also called the Nasty Nick, which I like better than the Darby Queen, because the Nasty Nick was a lot more upper body intensive, where I remember there's a lot of ropes and like monkey bars, and they didn't have the super fat wooden monkey bars. And
Yeah,
cool.
I haven't gotten up to that one. But yeah, and then the Darby Queen ends with it's about a 200 to 300 meter run right at the end that brings you right back to the same start point. So yeah, about 1.5 to 2 miles, somewhere in there. If you're really booking, I think if you can go sub, and I can't even remember. I think 20 25 minutes is like a really solid time, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and at Ranger School, it's just essentially there's no stopwatch running. It's basically pass fail, or at least when I went through, it was.
Right. Yeah, and the entire time you're usually doing push-ups while you're waiting in line, or beating your boots or something to make it that much more uncomfortable.
Yeah. I have some funny stories from Nasty Nick. There, guys would like fall off the rope climb and like land, and essentially there's crushed tire. That's like the padding, and they would land, and the instructor would come over and be like, "Would you like to quit?" And the guy'd be like, and he's like, "Would you like to quit?" Like completely stoic. And, then he's like, "No." And they're like, "Get back in line." Like not like, "How are you? Are you, did you hurt something?" It's immediately, do you want to quit? And then if you say no, then you get back in line. If you say yes, they escort you off the course. So, and one of the other interesting ones from the Nasty Nick was I was in the back of the formation, so I was one of the last people to start the course. And they have one where it's like essentially a series of tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
And normally, I'm not even remotely claustrophobic, but I could see how people could freak out in that, because the lines were getting lines at obstacles, and we were like jammed into a tunnel where you couldn't see the ending on either side. And there's literally like 6 people in the tunnel in front of you, another 8 people behind you. And you're just like sitting there waiting your turn in the dark, and you're like sweating, and you got somebody else's boots in your face. So
yeah,
that's kind of an interesting one. All right. So let's talk about, we touched on it a little bit about balancing OCR and military life. Do you have anything further to say on that? And how do you eventually try to tackle that when your current window closes?
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan, is to stick with it. And I think it all comes back to time management. And I think that goes for really anyone. And what I'm finding now is I just get up even earlier. I had to take a trip last week for my current job. And I found time. I had to be checked out of the hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I got up at 3:45 and got it in.
Yep.
So there's time if you make it. I guess it's just a matter of how much we're willing to put in and sacrifice. And a lot of times it comes to the expense of sleep, which is not ideal, but you can still get it in.
And since you made it through Ranger School, I'm sure you're very used to not sleeping. I think you've checked that block off the man card and experience.
Yeah. I love to sleep too, which is unfortunate.
So if you're not tracking, Ranger School's 61-day course, 3 phases. You start, and if you're lucky and good, you go straight from day 1 to day 61, no problems. If you are unlucky or not good, you get to repeat phases, and it can theoretically last a year or more, depending on how many times you recycle. So did you end up making it through on the first go, or did you have to repeat any phases?
So I'm a 90-day Ranger.
Okay.
So my entire squad was recycled in Darby the first time through, because we had a young ranger who continued to make mistakes on patrols that was costing the rest of the team. And apparently some RIs, or ranger instructors, heard some teammates of mine within my squad talk about not working for that guy on his patrol when he was in charge. I was completely unaware of it until the time came for us to move on to mountains, and they called our entire squad off to the side, and they brought us in one by one and explained to us that since we didn't prevent that from happening, we were just as much at fault. and I accepted the recycle, even though I had to go in Darby that first time through. So I got to do Darby twice. But from that point on, I went straight through. But looking back, it was actually a humbling experience. I think I don't know, it was good for a young lieutenant to see that like not everything is going to go your way, and sometimes you're accountable for more than just yourself in this career.
Absolutely true. Were you a winter or summer guy?
I was a summer guy.
Okay.
So I was part of the class that was known for the Darby Death March. So it was about 90 degrees, Fort Benning, Georgia. It was July. And, we step off for that 15, 16 mile foot march out to Darby after wrap week. And usually, when we step off, usually like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and you walk through the night. And it was like 9 degrees with like 90% humidity that night. And we just had people going down left and right. By the time we got there, I guess my class had so many heat injuries, like a 24-hour period, that they completely locked us down.
Oh, wow.
So we got there, sun's coming up, and we're just like sitting under a tree, baking in the sun, the few that like made it out there. And when I say few, it's still a large percentage of the class. But all of a sudden there's a lot of general officers walking around, asking a lot of questions. And we're like just wondering, like, this doesn't seem like Ranger School. We're kind of just sitting around right now. And what happened is they ended up, because of the temperatures and because our class had struggled so much in that 24-hour period, they made us go to night operations for Darby, which generally is not the case. So at the time, the course is not resourced to support all night operations. And so only about half of the people in my squad would get night vision. So if you were in leadership position, you'd have night vision. And if you weren't, you didn't have any night vision.
Yeah.
So until they could get all the night vision goggles out to the class, we all just kind of suffered through it, I guess, that first class. And so I just remember walking like aimlessly through the woods in the middle of the night, like not seeing anything, like tripping over stuff and falling down. And, we were like tethering each other with 550 cord to a rucks and just like following behind each other. Because usually before then you may finish your operation like when the sun's going down, but generally all the planning and everything was done during the daytime because it's the crawl phase of Ranger School, and then you kind of progress into mountains in Florida where you start working more at night. But yeah, so we weren't prepared for it, and it was kind of a funny experience.
Yeah, it's pretty funny you say tripping and falling all through the night. The people think of this elite military school, and a lot of times you're so sleep and food deprived. I mean, it looks like a clown show. Like people are out of control sometimes. And
absolutely.
Yeah. That's why if anyone wants to look up Rangers in Actions demonstration, or you ever go to a Ranger school graduation, there's all these there's all this awesome stuff the instructors are doing as a display. And you're like, yeah, we didn't look like that during the school. We were just
not at all. Like I have memories of walking in mountains in Florida in the middle of the night, basically falling asleep while walking, and just like falling like walking off the trail and not really coming to until I'm like breaking brush, like, oh, where am I? And like looking back, and like I just completely veered off the trail we were supposed to be walking on. I got to like run back onto the trail and fall back in, or you start seeing like trees as people.
Yep.
Or vice versa. It's a wild experience.
Yeah, and the hallucinations get worse at night because your mind's trying to figure out what you're looking at. So yeah, the droning gets really bad. If anyone's read my book, my biography, there's a bunch of stories in there of people acting crazy. Like I was platoon sergeant once, and the column of formation just stops, and I was like, what the hell's going on? Right? No radio call, no hand signal. So I walk up the formation to see what's going on. And like we're on like a skinny trail, and there's like boulders on one side. And like about halfway up the formation, there's like a 90-degree turn in the formation, and there's a guy standing like nose to rock, like an inch from it, right? And I was like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, just waiting for the guy in front of me to start moving. And I was like, you idiot, that's a rock. You're like, you're staring at a rock. And he's like, oh, sorry. And you're like, what the, you're like pushing them and getting them back in formation. But it's just like, I mean, we can fill up a podcast. I know we could with random Ranger School stories of people falling asleep, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, as you can tell from those stories, the finishing an obstacle course race is challenging, and finishing an endurance obstacle course race like World's Toughest Mudder is challenging, right? Because that's 24 hours of continuous movement. Ranger School is 61 days, and you're not moving continuously all the time, but it is so long, right? And like, I think you can put an average person of good physical conditioning through a day of Ranger School, and they'd be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. But it's like the nonstop grind over 61 days. So you just kind of talk me through, like, how you personally dealt with that mental grind. And then on top of that, right, like we talked about, there's a chance you could recycle. So it's not like, oh, well, I have one day crossed off and that's now behind me. Like, theoretically, that might be in front of you again. You just don't know it yet.
Right. Yeah, kind of how I dealt with it, I think was, when you commission as an infantry officer, I think so much pressure is put on us to pass Ranger School and get your Ranger tab. And they put so much stock in that when we're in IOBC or infantry officer basic course or IBOLIC today, that I think you kind of feel that pressure when you're there. And like going in, you just got to go into the mindset that like, I'm not leaving this course until I either have a tab or they kick me out. And I mean, I think everyone kind of goes in with the same mentality. But clearly there's a lot of people that when the going gets tough and you get a little deeper in this course, those thoughts really do creep in. And like you mentioned earlier, the Ranger instructors, they look for that, and they really look for any type of weakness, and they're going to try to offer people, the easy way out. And so for me, I went in, I just told myself like simply like, you're here till you get it. So why don't you do things right the first time and just get out of this course? And I kind of went in with that mentality. And then also I kind of looked to the people to my left and right and was like, if that guy's still here, like, I should still be here too. And I kind of like, you look around, there's always like a couple guys like, man, that guy's still here. Like, I'm as tough as him. Like, whenever you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself. And I think everyone has their moments and in those times in Ranger School. And I think still to this day, I can still remember my lowest point in Ranger School, and it was in the mountain phase. And those thoughts creep in, but I think the strongest people always like have something to fall back on of what really motivates them to be there and to see things through.
Gotcha. Yeah, good answer. I was I did Darby 3 times before I finally went through. So I did all of Darby once. It was Darby insert. So since you skip that first week it's called Wrap Week, and then you just do like the last 2 weeks, and then they day one me, and I had to start over from day one. Like, so wow. I finished Darby for the second time on a Friday, and day one was Monday, and I was like, you're supposed to go into Ranger School fresh and physically fit, and I was just a complete mess, and I was falling asleep in formation before Ranger School started, to give you an idea the condition I was in.
And to give the listeners an idea of like the PT test to get into Ranger School is not like there's a lot of, I'd say, like myths or rumors about how they know rep everybody and everything. But I will say they grade to the standard. And generally push-ups get a lot of people because a lot of people don't do them the right way. Right. And the fact that you had gone, you come in great shape and then you recycle and they just Darby inserted you. So then you go through the phase again and your body's now broken down over 2 phases. And for them to day one you, the fact that you even passed the push-up segment of that PT test is pretty impressive in my opinion.
Yeah. So also, people, if you read my biography, there's a funny story about that where I'm on my 39th push-up And when I do the 40th one, the instructor says 30. And I still don't know to this day if he was messing with me or if it was a genuine accident. And I almost got up and walked away because I was like, I was so angry. Like, you don't want to talk about being bitter. I mean, I'd been there because I was there over Best Ranger break too. I'd been there for like 3 months already. And I had such a bad like attitude going through that last time. I just didn't care anymore. But again, like you said at the beginning, you go in that with the mentality of like, they're either kicking me out or I'm getting my tab. And, that's the mentality I went in with. And it really tested me. I still have, people talk about PTSD for like military veterans. The worst dreams I have are still about Ranger School. And of everything I've seen and all the other training I've done, like people like I'll have dreams about Ranger School still. And I've been out of it for, I don't know, 14 years. And it's like just a terrible place. I just hate that place so much.
I can believe it.
We talked about the drive to continue, but what's your opinion on quitting? And I don't know where we're going to go with this conversation, but quitting when you're in a squad or platoon is not necessary. I'll let you take it, and then I'll throw some 2 cents in. But go ahead, your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it came to Ranger School, I mean, you can't make it in the infantry. You're going to have to go back eventually and get your Ranger tab if you want to progress and make a 20-year career out of this profession. So understanding that as a lieutenant, you're like, this isn't going to get any easier for me as I get older. Like, I'm going to go to my unit, people are going to look down on me without even knowing how good of a leader I really am. And then and so having those fears and knowing my unit's going to send me right back to go, and it just applies more pressure to me. And then even if I come back to the captain's career course later on in my career, I still got my tab, they're going to send me back again. And like, understanding that like you're going to do this eventually, or you're not going to have this for a career. I think just really drove me to get it done, like as a brand new second lieutenant. So I think I had that. And then when you just talk like quitting in general, I really think it's how you're just mentally wired and how you're brought up. Like my parents never let me quit at anything. And then also I think my parents raised me to be, whether this is good or bad, they raised me to be hyper competitive. And Ranger School is just another competition for me. Like a good example of that is like my, as a parent, you play a lot of games with your kids, and kids always want to win too. And my dad never let me win at anything growing up. Like he made me earn it. And it wasn't until I was like, my dad is a college basketball player, is still a really good runner to this day in his age group. And like he didn't let me beat him in one-on-one in basketball ever. So the first time I beat him, I was either a sophomore or I think I was a sophomore in high school. I think I was 16 years old when I finally beat him in one-on-one. So that puts him he was in his like mid to late 40s at that time. And we had played, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of one-on-one games starting when I was, 6 years old in the yard. Now he wouldn't block my shots when I was like a little kid, but he wouldn't let me win. Like he would, and it just drove me to, and it made it that much sweeter when I was 16 and I finally beat him in the driveway in Austin, Texas, and he punted the ball and down the driveway, and I like was fist pumping. But I just think, they never let me quit. They never let me start like a season, a club, anything, and then walk away from it. So I saw everything through. And then they just raised me to be super competitive. And I just, still to this day, I take things that probably aren't supposed to be a competition and I turn them into a competition, at least in my head.
Yeah. That's a good answer. You say you're talking about the pressure before you go to Ranger School. For me personally, that was like the most pressure I've ever felt, like for pretty much anything in my life. And people are like, oh, what about combat? And it's like, well, in combat, like if I lose, right, I'm dead, and then it's no longer my problem. So that was my way of dealing with it. But
I can completely relate to that, and it sounds really strange, but the same thing I can say for me is when I'm being like evaluated in like a fake scenario, I feel more pressure and stress than I do when I'm actually doing things in real life, if that makes sense.
I agree with that statement. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I felt very, when we were in Iraq, I felt very comfortable. Like it's just, not at the beginning, you know, at first, but like once you get into the swing of things, like, you know, you generally have a good idea of, you know, danger and what works and what doesn't work. And you figure things out pretty quickly. So
Definitely.
You know, the other thing part about not quitting, especially for something like, you definitely saw it at Ranger School, but it's amplified even more at selection, was it puts a burden on the rest of the guys you're with, right? So if you're at Ranger School and you quit and you're carrying the tripod, which is absurdly heavy, now someone else has to carry the tripod, right? So like, you're not only giving up on yourself, but like you're giving up on your teammates. And you mentioned like, you know, it's taking care of the guy to your left and right. And just kind of wanted to reemphasize that.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're in this together with everyone there. And you become good friends with these guys that are, you know, enjoying the misery alongside you. And yeah, you know, like, hey, they're still here, and they need me. And then also just the thought of having to look in the mirror, you know, and answer those questions of like, oh, I thought you were supposed to be in Ranger School. Just like, you know, made quitting not even an option.
Yep. Completely agree. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Best Ranger. Very long competition. We talked a little bit about it. You know, what lessons can you pull from Best Ranger and apply to competitive OCR?
So I think the biggest one is just the perspective of always being able to like dig deeper. And, you know, I think we're all so much more capable of than we believe. And I think Best Ranger really opened my mind to that. Like the first year, I can remember the first night road march, probably had at that point had really pushed myself farther than I had gone in in a 24-hour period. And those thoughts of like, you know, I'm feeling sorry for myself. My feet hurt. They all crept in to my head. And by the next year, when I came back, like it was way deeper into the competition where I kind of had those same thoughts. And so then you kind of get obsessed with like, hey, this is something I can continue to build on. And I would say in 2018, the last year I competed, like my body and my mind held up that much better. So you start to realize that like, hey, I'm capable of so much more than I ever thought. And I kind of bring that to the OCR world and that perspective of like, yeah, I'm hurting right now 12 miles into this course or 12 hours into the world's toughest mudder and everything. But like I've gone so much deeper before, and I know I still haven't hit my ceiling. So let's see how far I can take it. And I think that what's paying off for me right now as I continue to kind of build a better resume here in OCR.
Yeah, awesome. Slippery slope there of competitive sports and endurance. I hear you. Now, I remember seeing on Robert Killian's, I think it was his Instagram or something, he posted there was, and I'm assuming this rule is still in effect, that you can only compete in Best Ranger 4 times now. Is that still a rule?
Yeah, I think they capped it at 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your, I remember him posting it and people, you know, they're obviously, most of his followers are non-military, so they were like ripping into the rule. What's your opinion on the no more than 3 times rule?
So I'm torn on it. I completely understand why the Ranger Training Brigade instituted the rule. It's because we're kind of getting to the point where you were starting to see professional Best Ranger competitors. And that's not what our Army's about, and it's not what the competition is about. Now, some people might be saying like you don't have a lot of room to be speaking because you competed 4 years in a row, and I completely acknowledge that. However, I was in company command 3 of those 4 years, and the other year I was a student at the captain's career course.
That's for those who don't know. I mean, company command, that's a serious. You know, there's several like high marks on your, you know, military resume. I mean, that's a busy year for you. You have a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of stress, and a lot of tasks on your plate. So, I mean, that's about as busy as you can be as a captain.
Right, and so what happens is a lot of units what they'll do is they'll SD or special duty some of their best Ranger competitors. And they'll usually do it like 6 to 8 months out of the competition. And these guys will be pulled from their jobs, and they'll just train on the side specifically for the event. So they'll train for 8 months, them and their partner, along with their other teams who are in the event. And then there's other guys like me and my partners that we continue to do our jobs. And then after our workday is over, we would find time here, time there, time on the weekends to train. And then we showed up and we still beat the majority of those teams. And I took pride in that. So I completely understand that why RTB implemented the rule. It's because there were guys who I think had competed 7-8 times in a row. The competition was starting to become like some of the events were like rehearsed skits instead of, reacting to the event that is thrown in front of you. These guys had especially some of the guys down there at Fort Benning, like those guys had trained on that specific piece of terrain, on that piece of equipment with the exact ropes. I'm just thinking like the Prusik climb, which is a very technical event. These guys had trained for months on that exact apparatus that we're going to compete on. So, and then we come in and I'm
going to interrupt real quick. Prusik climb, essentially it's a rope hanging from a tower and there's knots on the rope, and you essentially like slide the knots up, and when you put your weight down on them, they lock. So you're like shimmying up this rope tower thing. If that explains it decently.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so they had trained on the exact equipment that we had in the competition. And then, some of the other teams showing up from other units they would get like a 30-minute class and like a 2-hour window to mess around on the rope beforehand, before doing it live in front of the cameras. There's just a lot of events that it's extremely hard to win that competition and contend if you're not put on special duty. So what my partners and we came in with, we kind of was like, hey, we're still here to win, but we're going to win every single physical event that we can. So no one's going to beat us in a ruck. No one's going to beat us in a run. No one's going to beat us in a swim. And then, we're going to do our best to hold our own in all the technical events and then limit the mistakes. And that's, some years we got penalized extremely heavily when we were one of the favored teams after a top 5 finish. We came back the next year with my exact same partner, and they were like waiting for us, and they were all over us. And I think we made every mistake we could have made, and they penalized for all of them. So it's a tough event. But getting back to your original question, completely understand why RTB put that rule in. But then the other side of the argument, which is why I'm torn, is that you can't have the best Ranger competition if you don't have the best Rangers there. So there's a lot of heavy hitters. There's Robert Killian, like you mentioned. There's some other guys who competed 3, 4, 5 times, which people want to see the top dogs show up to go head to head, and it makes for a really exciting competition when you do have that experience, because these guys understand the competition and they kind of take it to a new level when you see these animals still going hard on day 3. It's just a lot of fun where, I felt like in 2000, I think it was 17 or 18, they really heavily weighted like marksmanship to the point that it was almost like ridiculous, where the marksmanship events on day 1 basically decided the entire event. And they devalued physical fitness, which is not in the spirit of the competition, in my opinion. So by the time we get to day 3, the top teams, we were still there. But when you looked at the back half of the crowd that still finished, so usually 52 teams start, and then generally 24 to 16 teams will finish. When you look to the back half of the field, like on the final buddy run, you had teams like limping in and walking the entire 2-mile course because they shot really well on day 1. and then made the cut. And I say that's not what the best Ranger competition is about, in my opinion. When you continue to open it up and you bring all the studs there, you're going to see teams still running, 12-minute 2 miles with boots on, carrying a weapon after 62 hours of competition. And I think that's what it's all about as well.
Yeah. I think that was perfect. You answered the question. The answer was perfect, because I think people see that, they're no longer bringing quote unquote the best people, and they were like what? That's ridiculous. But I mean, you know that, especially with there's people doing special duty and they're not doing their job anymore. All they're doing is just training for that, and then it turns into who's the best Ranger competition competitor versus who's the best soldier.
Absolutely, that's
soldier related skills. So
right, and I mean, my one recommended course of action, if anyone from RTB is out there listening, is they should go back to the roots of what this competition looked like early on. And I know it's difficult because there's a lot of sponsors, and I know it's been televised in years past, but the original event, guys came right out of their units. They had no idea what was coming. You just kind of,
that's cool.
You go in, it was just like a long ruck with a lot of events in between. You have no idea what's coming next. And I think if you gave like a 60-day warning, you know what I mean, and did it executed at any time throughout that year, and you just have to be ready at all times. I think that's the true test of who the best Rangers are, of who keeps themselves prepared at all times. And that's really what we should all be doing.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that idea. All right, let's continue along with crossover lessons, right? So notice you deployed to Afghanistan a lot, which is complete opposite of me. I only went to Iraq, never made it out to Afghanistan. But, any lessons you can take from combat that apply to competitive sports or obstacle course racing specifically?
I mean, I think it is, once again, different type of perspective. I think when I'm standing in the starting gates, starting, everyone has those pre-race jitters, and we put so much pressure on ourselves. But I think having some of those combat experiences, I kind of lean on to tell myself, like, hey, I do this stuff for fun, is really why I'm here. And there's a lot, more important or important things going on throughout the world than me racing in this random OCR race, and kind of just, takes that pressure off myself a little bit before I start. So I think those butterflies are good. But at the same time, I think a lot of us put, too much pressure on ourselves. And I think a few combat deployments, seeing different parts of the world and the way some people live and the struggles that they face on a daily basis kind of, puts all that in perspective for me.
Good answer. I'm sure I've heard Afghanistan is a quote unquote, from my friends, a new level of poor compared to Iraq. But yeah, it's like you said, puts things in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first time I met you actually was last year at Toughest Mudder East, and you finished second. I finished third. There's another vet on the podium, Erin Rost, who won the female division. And
yes.
At the time, someone told me you were French, and I apologized for thinking you were French. And then I was like, oh, this guy's not French. You're in the army. But, why do you think, again, I think we might be overlapping some of our previous questions, but, why do you think the military does good at Toughest Mudder, or specifically like that specific event? And then at a previous World's Toughest, I wrote an article because, since there's a military vet on the team podium, was a military vet, 2 military vet on the individual male and 1 on the female. So we were all over the place.
Yeah. I'll give you a pass on the French, just because my last name, it's a little misleading. And yeah, there is also a strong Canadian, contingent out there that with the last name. So no hard feelings on that one.
I think the announcer made a joke that I took it serious. I think that was the issue.
Yeah. And I think the military, it kind of forces, is a point that I've made a couple times, but I think mental and physical toughness they're skills that we can develop, and then they're also perishable at the same time. And I think the military just keeps us sharpened in a way with our toughness. And I think that's working my job now, where I'm working on Capitol Hill. I was working on the Pentagon the year before. Like, I'm still in the Army, but it's, I'm essentially a house cat, as they like to say. So I'm working in a cubicle. I'm wearing a suit and tie. I'm working, 8 to 5, and you kind of get comfortable. And I think that happens to everyone. And but when you're down on the line and you're going to the field every day, you're wearing body armor, a helmet, you're rucking to the range, you're shooting, you're out in the elements. Like, you kind of develop that mental and physical toughness. And it's when you kind of take a step back and I'm working in the office, like, those skills can perish. And so that's kind of one thing that I've taken into my training here in the Washington, D.C. area. While I am working in office, is to try to keep myself sharp. And what I do things like, people think I'm crazy when they see me out training, but I'll do things to make myself uncomfortable to keep myself sharp in those areas. So I do things like, on some of my long runs, I'll be running through a trail, and then I'll be like, oh man, I really don't want to run these last 8 miles with, like, wet and muddy feet. And I'll, like, run through a creek. Or I'm going to I usually have a bucket and a sandbag in my truck. I'll finish my run, and I want to be done for the day. And I'll be like, nope, you're going to go do 5 hill repeats on this hill at Acatink Park here in Springfield before you can go home. And so I kind of do things to make my training more uncomfortable. And I try to stay away from the air-conditioned gyms. Like, I still do it, but I don't make that the staple of my training, if that makes sense. I do a lot of stuff in my garage. I try to do as much outside in the elements that I'm going to be racing in. So I think that's why people in the military generally do well, is because that toughness has been, like, pounded into us or beaten into us. And what do you think?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, the other thing I was going to say for that specific event, that was the first Toughest Mudder where there was no cash prize. And I think military people are really good at suffering for no immediate tangible reward. Yeah. Right? Like, it's like, oh, you want me to do something really painful for, like, this little piece of cloth that essentially is, right? Like, the Ranger tab the tab itself is worthless, right? It's like, it's just a piece of cloth that goes in your uniform. Right. I mean, it represents a lot more, but, like, people say that Ranger School I've heard it takes years off your life because of how badly you're abusing your body. And I think people in the military, like some of the things you were saying, have just had a lot of experience doing things that are painful and very uncomfortable, sometimes for seemingly no reason. So, if we find something that motivates us, like we want to win a race, I think we're pretty good at it if it involves suffering a lot.
Right. And it also works the other way too, is the sufferfest of OCR. We kind of lean on those experiences and that type of fitness as well when we get back to the Army.
Yeah, 100%.
And we're competing against our peers, whether it's in the school or, SFAS or Ranger School or wherever. But yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that, with no cash prize at that event.
Awesome. Now we're going to start wrapping it up, but I mentioned at the beginning you were a rafting instructor, and I'm going to ask this because I have an answer from my side, but are there any lessons from the world of rafting that you have brought over to OCR?
Yeah. So when you sent me the read ahead, I thought hard about this one. I was like, man, I don't know if I have a good answer for this one. The one thing I came up with is the importance of layering, the choice of clothing for a lot of these OCR events, specifically when you're going to get wet. And I was a complete newcomer. I was not in shape either. 2018, showing up to Atlanta to do World's Toughest Mudder. So quick story here is I'd seen the event in the past. I was like, man, that looks awesome. I want to do that someday. Get out to Washington, D.C., just decide on a whim I'm going to do it. But I've never done a Tough Mudder event ever. So I try to waver in to be one of the elite contenders. And they tell me like, yeah, like Best Ranger is cool. That was the event I was trying to use. But they're like, since you've never done a Tough Mudder, we'll give you like contender, contender status, but you're not getting the elite contender. So I started like the very back of the crowd. No one knew who I was. But like I was there to win. I was not in very good shape. But I knew I had the toughness. I knew I had the experience I could rely on. And I knew I was going to go 24 hours. And so I had no idea where I stood in that race until the morning of, when they stopped me and put the yellow bib on, I think at hour 20. And I think with elite contender status, I would have placed higher because I wouldn't have been waiting in line. No one cared. No one wanted to get out of my way.
Yep.
Or held me on anything. So I was basically on my own for the entire first 20 hours. Once I put that yellow bib on, I was like, wow, that would have been incredible to have this treatment the first 20 hours of this race.
Yeah, people treat you like royalty. All of a sudden, people are letting you go ahead. There's, it works with the elite contender bib. It works with the green bib. It works with the if you get the 75-mile bib early enough in the race and put it on, people like literally part the seas for you. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, so I was not really expecting that, and I was helping people on obstacles because I thought that was just like part of and it is part of what Tough Mudder is all about. But then I was also competing, so but what I think what kept going and a lot of the elites struggled with is the temperatures, and I mean I was not immune to it. I was freezing, just like everyone else. But I think my experience of rafting, in those early, because this is rafting up in central Maine on the Kennebec River, early springtime, where we're in dry suits, and kind of that layering and kind of what to wear and what was going to work to keep me going. So I had some of my old rafting supplies on hand, and then like I think a couple weeks before the event, I talked to Robert Killian. I was like, hey, what else do I need? And he's like, well, you need a wetsuit. So I picked up a wetsuit last minute, ended up wearing that, I think, for like 20 hours of the event. But I think that experience of layering clothing and what type of fabric is a no-go for water obstacles paid off for me. So I think that's all I could come up with. What did you have?
Good. No, that was you're right on, but on a slightly different aspect of it. So that was all great stuff. What I took, so I used to go rafting when I was a Cub Scout and Boy Scout with my dad, and I remember rafting as a kid, and we'd have like a t-shirt on underneath your life preserver, and my dad would always be like, just take off the t-shirt, it's not doing anything good, it's just keeping your upper body wet. It's not, if your skin is exposed, your skin will dry. And I took that mentality, and I raced a lot of my toughest that way, where people will have layers of fabric on that are going to keep them wet, and I'll run shirtless. The trick is you have to be able to run because to generate the heat to dry off. And it works significantly better during daytime because the sun will dry you out versus nighttime. Nighttime it still works, but just not as well because the sun's not out. But that's the one big thing I've taken away, where I'll run shirtless. And even at Atlanta that year, me and Wesley were running shirtless for like the first 25 miles. I mean, we were people were like, I mean, Pete, that was a cold year. I mean, people started off in wetsuits in 2018.
Yeah.
So and I remember running, and me and Wesley would spread out, and I was running a lot just because I was like, I don't want to get hypothermia, and I so like that was keeping me warm. But yeah.
I think for me, looking back at that one, the wetsuit, I would have gone without it for longer, and I would have come out of it, I think, in the morning. But what kept me in it was the fact that it protected me.
Yeah.
When I did like on the obstacles, like my shins and my knees, I think that was the worst part of that Philly one for me, was just my shins, basically from ankle to my knee, were just destroyed at the end without that extra layer of padding that the wetsuit provided.
Yeah, I always notice when I put the wetsuit over the knees and the shins because mine are always torn up, and I'm always like, oh, this is so much better.
Yeah, every time.
All right, so let's kind of start wrapping it up. So 2020 is almost a complete wash, but Spartan is saying they're going to start holding the national series again. So what are your plans for 2020? And then we'll talk 2021.
Yeah, so I mean, it's with everything on hold right now. My plans are kind of on hold, but I plan on pursuing what's left of the Spartan US National Series. So hopefully West Virginia late August will be my next event. And then it basically, if OCR is going to end up being a wash this season, I'm going to start looking, pursuing some of the ultra running events because I just think those probably have a higher chance of happening at this point because you can, send people out in waves and we're not touching the same obstacles one after another. So I think we're seeing more trail and obstacle races come back, or trail and ultra events come back before obstacle racing. So I'll look into some of that type of stuff. But just a couple of things I have on the calendar, considering, pursuing the U.S. national 24-hour running team, which
nice.
The minimum is 135 miles in 24 hours, which I think should be no problem. At this point, I've got a goal. I haven't broken 240 in a marathon ever, which I think I'm in shape to do that. I would like to just, find one this fall if OCR is gonna be not starting up until 2021. I would like to break 6 hours in a 50 miler, which I was just off that last year in K. So that's a goal of mine. And then I think, and the other one that people ask me about all the time is I'm considering applying to the Barkley Marathons if Laz will have me. I think that kind of just combines, everything that we're all about is the ultra event, and then you throw in some land navigation on top of it. And I think that's just the ultimate challenge right there. And there's, like you said, we're in the military. We're all about doing something for no major prize. Just the internal gratification.
The one thing so one of my friends that was in fifth group with me went out and did Barclays, and you need to go out there ahead of time and essentially run parts of the course and train on the course because there's stuff on the map that's not, there's stuff that's not on the map that's on the ground and vice versa. So you have to actually, like the guys who do and girls who do well there, go out there and train in that area repeatedly, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like Best Ranger, how there's, people have like the inside scoop and they know what's going on. So if you want to do well there, you physically have to plan for a couple trips out there before you actually show up.
That's really good to know. Yeah, I was hoping to hitch my wagon to one of the vets out there, and at least run the first few laps with someone who kind of knows what they're doing, and then until I kind of figure things out. But yeah, that's a great point.
If you end up getting in, shoot me an email. I'll introduce you to my friend from fifth group. Okay.
Yeah, I would love to do that, but I think I guess my priority when it comes to racing is, the Spartan US National Series, hopefully hitting Tahoe for the North American Championships, and then would love to do the Spartan Ultra World Championships if they do pop back on the calendar, and then the World Championships as well. I think Abu Dhabi looks like it's off. So we'll see if it springs somewhere in the United States. Have you considered the Spartan 24-hour?
I have. It does not play to my. If World's Toughest Mudder wasn't going to happen, I would probably go out there just for the fun of it. Okay. But it doesn't play to my strengths. I'm not super good on mountains, and I know the solution to that is to train more mountains and run more mountains. And I know that I've just haven't made the physical and mental effort to pursue that route because most of my races are not super mountain heavy. So it would really be, I'd have to specially train for that. And I haven't made that commitment yet. Yeah.
In Kansas, you're not going to find much in your neck of the woods for terrain to train on too. Yeah. And that's another option too, is would love to come back to the World's Toughest Mudder at some point. I love that event in 2018. That's one of my favorite events I've ever been a part of. Just pure suffering, and that was brutal with those conditions. So I do plan to return at some point. Just don't know when that will be yet.
Yeah, that was a good year. I had fun.
It was.
Yeah. Pierre, before we go, tell us something people would be surprised to know about you. So preferably non-OCR related. The more random, the better. What do you got?
Yeah. I guess one thing is that most people are surprised about is I went to grad school coming out of my undergrad to I was in a post-baccalaureate medical program at the University of North Carolina. So was on the path to become a doctor, dropped out of school after one semester at University of North Carolina to join the Army because I was done with school, just wanted to get to work. And then kind of the ironic part is the Army sends me right back to grad school 10 years later. So we talked about quitting earlier. That was one time I did quit.
So since we're talking about Army stuff, I'll let people know, right? So like, I think again, people meet me now and have a certain impression of who I was. When I first graduated high school, I wanted to go into the Army, but I had no intentions of doing anything combat related. I was like, all right, I just want to go in there, get some free school, and do a couple of years. I'll probably get out after that. And just the more, again, kind of like the slippery slope of endurance, I got in, and the more people I met and the more people I interacted with, they were like, I fell into a group of friends who were like, why are you going to be a medical service officer? Why don't you, if you're going to join the Army, do Army stuff? And I was like, that's a pretty good point. And then you start hanging out with those people enough and it changes your mindset. And all of a sudden you're like, no, I want to go to Ranger school. I want to suffer needlessly for 61 days to earn a little patch on my shoulder and shorten my lifespan. And it's a slippery slope and you end up sliding down. I mean, that's how I found endurance sports I was prepping for Ranger school. I was prepping for selection. And eventually my interest in the military has dwindled and I'm still in, but I got a couple of years left and I'll be able to retire. And my interest in endurance sports has risen. So it's almost the kind of the building block for why I was doing it is overtaken the actual reason, which is just kind of interesting. But
yeah, that sounds eerily familiar with kind of what how you ended up in special forces. I came in with kind of the same mentality of just a few years, get some experience, and then my plan was to go work for a 3-letter agency somewhere. But a lot of times you needed the education, and then you also needed some type of experience. So I was hoping to just come in, be maybe an intel officer, get the security clearance, get some experience, and then do my 3.5-year term, and then get out. And then I got in. I kind of got wrapped up in that culture of pushing the limits. Kind of came to the conclusion that if I'm going to be in the Army, I'm going to do something that I can't do in the civilian sector. And I was the infantry, and then one thing leads to the other. Next thing you know, you're a Ranger platoon leader, leading raids in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So you're right. It is it's a slippery slope, but it's worked out great for me and my family, and we couldn't be happier. So,
100% agree with that. Yeah.
I did come up with another kind of crazy, weird fact. If you want to edit this one in,
go for it.
So I have Dupuytren's contracture in my right hand.
No idea what that means.
It's like a genetic. It's like a genetic ailment that can come on at any time. And it predominantly appears in men of like Scandinavian descent, which my dad has it too. But we both of us are like us. We might have a very, very small part of that in us. But what that is it's where the tissue it's usually your pinky and your ring finger this tissue will start to form, and it caused like a contracture in your hand. So in college playing basketball, I'd broken and dislocated both of those fingers at different points. So they were already kind of mangled and like misshapen, if you will, when I came into the Army, but my hand was straight. And then over the years, my fingers on my right hand just slowly started to contract. And by the time I went and actually saw a doctor, my pinky and my ring finger on my right hand were almost at 90 degrees. Like I couldn't straighten them further than 90 degrees. So you can only imagine what my salute looked like.
Yeah.
So that's really the point. Like it really wasn't slowing me down from gripping anything.
I feel like it should help with gripping because your hand's always stuck in that position.
No, it's funny you said that because like I could like, you know, on a carry when everything else is failing, like those fingers aren't going anywhere. But yeah, so I decided to get it checked out, and they're like, when I went to the doctor, I was like, yeah, I've broken and dislocated both these fingers before. So I think there's just a lot of scar tissue. And he's like, yeah, I think you're right. However, I think you also might have this Dupuytren's contracture. And I've actually seen it, which is kind of funny, that I've seen two other people in the OCR community post about, you know, having this disease essentially in their hand. And they're like, I don't know how I'm going to continue to do this in OCR and everything. So I had the surgery. My fingers are straight now. I got scars all the way down my hand. And my hand has made a full recovery, but it can come back at any time. So kind of a weird thing that kind of works against my OCR career. But it's been clear for the last, I guess it's been almost 5 years now. So it hasn't come back. But kind of a weird thing to crop up when you're in my late 20s, really, when it appeared.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, according to the Army, I'm slowly losing hearing in my left ear, which.
Oh, maybe you'll get paid for that someday.
Yeah. So she's like, let me guess. When I went into the hearing test last year, she's like, you're a right-handed shooter? I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, because your left ear is closer to the barrel of the gun, and your right ear, essentially your skull is protecting the sound wave from your right ear. So could be that, could be IED explosions, who knows, but my wife says I'm always deaf. So and I never noticed it until now that like someone told me something's wrong. Now I know I can notice it. I'm like if I put my headphones in, I always thought my left headphones was usually full of sweat. I'm always like, oh, it's my left headphone that's malfunctioning. It's not my ear. But apparently it's my ear. So
now that you mention it, I kind of feel the same way. I might want to get that checked out, I guess.
Yeah, all right. And Mark, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, before you go, what brigade were you in the 101st?
So I was in the 4th Brigade, so Currahee that no longer exists.
Gotcha.
Yeah, were you Bastogne?
Rakkasan.
Rakkasan, of course. I'm surprised you didn't tell me. If you were in Rakkasan, usually those guys all let you know.
Yeah, and then we got to show you our tattoo too. But I don't have a Rakkasan tattoo, but I actually thought about getting one for one of the soldiers we lost, but I ended up not doing it. But yeah, so good times in the 101st. I had a great time there.
It was. I would go back there again if given the opportunity.
All right, on. Well, hopefully we'll cross paths either on the OCR world or somewhere on the military side. And wish you best wishes on your training, and looking forward to see what you can do in the sport, especially being relatively new to it. But obviously, you've been excelling in pretty much every sport you've participated in. So, really curious to see where you go.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Evan. And I will be showing up at Fort Leavenworth in September. So I'll reach out. So we'll have to get some workouts in. I see that rig you got in your garage. You could probably show me a thing or two on that.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Yeah. We'll definitely meet up. I'm excited. As long as it doesn't get canceled.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We'll catch you later, Mark.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks again.